All right. Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Zoom check-in. Hope everyone is doing well. Hope you can hear me and see me. Um, I'd just like to start out with a few little housekeeping things since we are pretty far along into our course now. This is week number 6 out of 8. So we only have 2 weeks left. So I thought I would just cover a couple of housekeeping things just as reminders. I know you already know these things, but bears repeating that next week on May 8th, you have your organizational analysis paper due. Then your final assessment, your final exam is due on May 15th. I know I've gotten a couple of those already and have reviewed those and turned those back to you. But that is due then on the 15th. You then have your final Canvas discussion board post that is due next week as well. Next week, what we will do in our Zoom check-in session is we will reserve the time for presentations of your organizational analysis papers. So I have asked you to email me and let me know whether you would prefer to present your analysis live next week in our Zoom session, or if you would prefer to just submit it through Canvas, do it asynchronously. I'm giving you the option of doing either one. I've heard so far from, I think, 10 people who've expressed a preference. So if you haven't emailed me yet to let me know if you're going to present live next week or just submit through our Canvas site, please do send me an email so I will know what your plans are and we can then plan accordingly. So, but next week our Zoom session will all be dedicated to your presentations. So what we'll do in those sessions is for anyone who is presenting next week, when it comes time for your presentation, I'll call on you. I'll enable your ability to share your screen. You can then share your PowerPoint slides through the share screen feature, open up your microphone, and the floor will then be yours. And again, they're very brief, very informal presentations. 5-10 minutes, I think, certainly will suffice. If you prefer instead to submit your presentation through Canvas, what I'm then, or through, I guess we use Canvas, through Canvas, they just submit that with speaker notes, or if you want to narrate it, you can do that as well. If you want, some people like to do their own little Zoom session, record through Zoom, and then submit that recording, just so I have more than just your slides. So I would like to have a little bit more detail to your presentation than just bullet points that you're putting on your slides. So however you want to narrate it, speaker notes, whatever you want to use is fine. And you then submit that then through our course website. So I think, according to all my little notes here, I think that's it for all my housekeeping issues. Do y'all have any questions about any of these remaining assignments or how we're finishing up the course over the next couple of weeks? Any questions at all?
I had one. For the final assessment that's posted, what are your expectations of that in terms of like length? Is it kind of just like a paragraph to answer each question, or is it? I didn't know the structure.
Yeah, good question. It's brief, so be parsimonious. I'm thinking maybe a couple of paragraphs for each of those three questions. I think that would be sufficient. Yeah, so very brief, very parsimonious. Any other questions? Everyone's good on the organizational analysis paper? I think it's pretty straightforward, and all the requirements are laid out for you pretty easily. So, are there any questions at all on that paper? What you're doing for that? Okay. All right. Then we'll spend the remaining amount of time today just going over some of the information that we've covered over the past 2 weeks and affording you the opportunity, if you'd like, to take that information and then apply that information to your organization. So, as you know, last week the topic was systems theory. We presented closed system versus open systems, presented Robert Merton and his middle range theories as kind of a bridge to get us from the closed systems theorist to the open systems theorist. We talked about systems theory as kind of being this holistic approach to look at your organization, where you are viewing your organization basically as being part of an entire system. So it's one part of a machinery. And so to understand why the organization does what it does, you have to understand its external environment and the opportunities and the challenges and the threats that exist within that external environment. I think I've read all of your posts in our discussion board, and I think everyone did a nice job of talking about your organization. in relation to the environment. I think most people saw their organization as operating within an open system, which is very common, obviously, in the public and nonprofit sectors. Few people saw some closed system elements within their organization, which again, I think is appropriate. But in terms of the role of the organization in its environment, all of our organizations tend to operate in some type of a holistic, open type of system. Then for this week, we talked about those modern organization theories. So we presented things like participative management, autocratic versus democratic leadership. We presented quality management theories. We presented things like organization culture, what the leadership literature tells us about our organizations and why our organizations behave the way in which they do. We kind of group all those in this class as our modern theories. And as I said, we kind of use that modern term a little loosely because some of the theories date back into the 60s and the 70s. Some are a little bit more contemporary in nature. We kind of put them all together in this rubric of modern organization theories. So reflecting upon some of those theories, again, things like participative management and quality management and leadership. Talk to me a little bit about how those theories manifest themselves in your organization. I know some people have already done that, obviously, in the discussion board post, but just share with us how your organization represents some of those modern theories. Anybody want to jump in? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so might still be on mute if you're trying to participate. Again, the question just is, what theories do you see in your organization? Because again, it's important for us in a class like this to get that nexus of how our theories relate in practice. We learn these theories, that's great for the educational purpose of it all. It'll help you out down the road in your other classes. It'll probably help you out with your graduate project or at the end of your program. But how it really helps you out for a lifetime is if you can see how it really does apply in your organization. Anybody see any applications?
Hi, Professor. This is JJ. I'll go ahead and start. Normally it's Sandy. Sandy, I was waiting for you to say something. You're the first person that'll jump in. I guess I'll go with the quality management and total quality control. So I'm sure all of us were able to relate at some point in time. For us at DPSS, we typically have a quality control unit. They're like the workers within that unit. They're like our humanized Bible in a sense. So we consider them those who are truly knowledgeable in all of the programs that we provide at DPSS. And so they're there to not only be able to guide the case carrying workers in terms of inquiries when there's a problematic case or things of that nature, but DPSS as a whole, there are certain mandates that we have in terms of the state. And so for the CalFresh program, which is the food stamps program particularly, their error rates that the state has a certain guideline, but DPSS, so that they can meet that expectation, typically lowers that guideline so that we're always fulfilling that expectation. Because if we don't and we exceed, I guess in the past, I haven't been with this department for a very long time, but I guess in the past, there were times where the department was actually on the brink of being sanctioned. And sanctions actually equate to, millions lost in terms of the budget. So it's really a domino effect in terms of the theory itself. So it's really important that not just DPSS, but all agencies implement and utilize quality management, because there's that certain expectations in terms of the outputs, for the goods that we're providing and the services that we're providing. But there has to be some type of utility in terms of that. Are we providing it, within certain mandates and guidelines, so that, of course, the consequence isn't something of a sanction. That's kind of where I'll go with it.
No, I think that's great. Thank you. Thanks. You're exactly right. And we see a lot of our organizations, you have those quality assurance types of mechanisms that are built in. I think the really interesting point that you make is how there is some subjectivity in those quality standards as well, in that they get tweaked a little bit, they get modified a little bit so that the organization does not get sanctioned. I think that's one of the big differences between public and private sectors, is that because of some of the subjectivity in how we measure our performance in the public sector, it is oftentimes easier, and sometimes there's a good reason for why we modify those quality measures a bit more in the public sector as compared to the private sector, just because quality is so much easier to measure in the private sector as compared to the public sector. So, absolutely, that's a great point. Very well done. Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to pick up on JJ's point and talk about your organizations?
I'll touch on JJ's point. I completely agree. Quality, I mean, especially in city organizations, we're highly scrutinized on, the accuracy of the stuff that we report. And, especially in the police department, we live in a very litigious society, so everything is generally litigated. So when you sit there on a deposition and there are inaccuracies in a report, it can be very detrimental to the city. So quality is definitely, but also participative. If you're not engaged as a supervisor, as an administrator, I think it has a big impact on the organization as a whole. I'm sure sometimes, with a large organization like DPSS, you probably really feel it if the people up top aren't engaged or aren't really, providing any kind of real leadership. It has a huge impact on an organization. In our case, the chief, I've been through 7 chiefs, and they have a huge impact on the success of the organization. So I believe the more they're engaged, the more they're, participative, it has a huge impact as well.
Absolutely, I agree. And participative management, one of my favorite theorists, we don't cover her in this class, but I do in some other courses, that's Martha Durthik. Martha Durthik, one of her major theories she's best known for is the engagement of those individuals who are implementing policies and programs, and just how important it is to allow them to participate in the development of the programs and development of the policies, if they're the ones who are then on a daily basis who will be charged with implementing those programs and those policies. Without the buy-in of your implementers, you're not going to have a successful implementation. And I think that buy-in has to come from something like participative management, as you discussed. So yeah, I absolutely agree that it's an elemental aspect of leading organizations. One that sometimes, especially when we're facing a crisis, is sometimes something we forget about. And we just, as leaders, decide this is what we're going to do and this is the direction we're going in, without really getting that buy-in on the part of our employees and our followers. Very good. Excellent. Anybody else?
I'll kind of add on what John's also already elaborated on with regarding to the participative management, and also with the COVID-19 situation just that we're dealing with. I think right now, more so than ever, we've really seen, I feel, within our organization from the city manager down, definitely a change in the leadership environment, definitely paying attention, because the COVID-19 situation is not only impacting the workforce at work, but also on the home front. And so being sensitive to how we're all teleworking, kids being having to be homeschooled and whatnot, and really taking into consideration the impact and the workload, and how different families are being impacted. And I think that that's something that we really look to the organization right now to see how different managers are dealing with the situations, and then even more so now, kind of revving up for the reopening, be it that it be a phased development, kind of still, how does that impact our organization, given the different age groups that we're focused on, the different age groups that may work within our organization, different health conditions, and so on and so forth. So I think right now we're more so, I think, paying attention, more so kind of a feeling kind of effort. So at least that's what I'm experiencing in Irwindale.
Great, absolutely. And I think another important point that you touched upon is this reopening, with COVID-19 and how organizations approach the reopening. And in approaching the reopening, I think a lot of organizations are recognizing that different employees and different consumers who interface with the organization have different needs, and they have different susceptibilities as well. And so you have to be very careful. You can't just do a blanket reopening. You have to reopen contingent upon the needs of the individuals that you are dealing with. And here at the university, we're dealing with this idea of how do we reopen in the fall? Do we have all online classes? Do we have all in-person classes? Do we have a mixture of in-person and online? So we're dealing with that now, but we're also dealing with the question of who teaches those courses. And so if you are going to permit a limited number of face-to-face courses in the fall, who is the instructor on that course? And then who are the students who are in that course as well? So we have some instructors who are, in high-risk categories. Perhaps I've got one instructor in my program at Long Beach. God love him. He's been teaching the program since 1973. He's in his upper 80s. Still, he does a great job in the classroom. Students love him. But obviously, he is in a highly vulnerable category for COVID-19. So he prefers to teach on campus. Can we have him teach on campus, though? And so perhaps another course could be offered on campus by another instructor, but perhaps his needs to be done in some alternative modality. And so I think you've really got this contextual, this contingency-based approach in terms of not only what your employees need, but also what your consumers need and how susceptible they are to the virus. So I think that's a great point. All organizations are struggling with that now. Very, very good. Anyone else have any contributions?
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and also share a story and touch upon John's point. I know John brought up the idea of police officers having to keep their tickets and the error rates on their tickets. And it actually happened to my aunt where she got a ticket from a police officer and he made a mistake. And so the city department actually returned that money back over to us. So that's really important because that could have been revenue that's for the city. And then another point that I wanted to touch upon was Teresa's point also in terms of reopening. So in my organization as a social workers right now, we are still going out. But in terms of limiting that amount of time and exposure, we are at the home visits. And so what we're trying to do now is trying to figure out a point where when is it safe for us to be there for the normal time, and then in between all of this, still trying to case manage while we are working from home on some of the days.
Yep, a great point. I know one of my colleagues in the college, she is the director of the social work program here. And I just got off a meeting, a chairs meeting just a couple of minutes ago, and that's something she was talking about with social work in terms of the placement of her students in social work and how she's going to do it over the summer and how she does it safely, not just for her students, but also for the clients that those students are servicing. And I know it's a huge consideration, especially in a field like social work. Excellent. Very good point, Sandy. Thank you. Anybody else? Any observations?
Yeah, I've kind of back to the quality management. I've noticed more of the obstacles. At my district, we have a lot of influx of different leadership all the time. And it's kind of hard to stay in line when you don't even know who the supervisor is. And that's one of the big revolving doors. And also one of the things that's especially happening with COVID-19 is the lack of resources, because now those preventative measures weren't really taken in advance. So everybody's just scrambling, doing things. And it's like, well, maybe we can reassess things and analyze and then try to revisit these and then interact with amongst each other. Like, how can we do this process better? Because every day there's constant clients that come up and they're not even aware that our offices are closed or that they can do things online. And they're like, well, I got these papers and I need to get this done. And so it's kind of like, well, how can we better serve them if we kind of don't know what's going on with us? It's a big, I guess, revolving issue for everybody. So.
Yeah, excellent point. And like Curtis points out, the leadership dimension is huge. When you have all this turnover in leadership, you have a loss of direction. It's difficult for you to have these consistent definitions of performance measures, the mission statement, they become very inconsistent when you have a lot of new leaders coming in. And then the idea about resources is really important. We are seeing an influx of resources temporarily to help out with the immediate crisis that we're now facing. I think when we're really going to see a major impact in terms of resources will be 6 months to a year down the road. I think when you start looking 6 months to a year down the road, you're really going to feel these high unemployment rates. You're really going to feel that decrease in state revenue, and that state revenue, as the bottom falls out on that state revenue, several months later, that's going to then trickle down in terms of lower appropriations for not only state agencies, but lower amounts of state aid to counties and to cities. So I really think in about 6 months is when we're really going to start feeling this lack of resources. And that's pretty common. A crisis occurs, there's an influx of resources, but then 6 months to a year down the road, do those resources continue? Or once those immediate resources are gone and the structural resources have declined, where do you then go for resources? And so I think we're really going to feel this in about 6 months to a year from now in terms of our resources and our monetary support. I think a lot of state universities are starting to realize that now. The discussion was, well, going in the fall, what types of budget cuts are we going to have to make? And they're a little relieved because they're saying, well, our budget cuts are going to be relatively minor. You're looking at about maybe about 3 to 5% budget cut. My answer is, yeah, that's this fall. What's going to happen in the spring? And what's going to happen next fall when you don't have the appropriations you usually have? That's when you're going to start seeing the 10 to 15 to 20% budget cut. And I don't know if you've been in an agency that's experienced a budget cut above 20%. Probably a lot of you have. I know I was not only here in California, but I was in Florida. The year I went to the University of Florida, we had a 25% budget cut that year. And a 25% budget cut is really, really devastating to an organization. So I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, and I don't want to depress you today, but I'm just saying that the real impact probably is going to be coming 6 months to a year in the future.
Dr. Powell, if I could also add, in the local government, we're already experiencing that impact now. Most of us operate on a fiscal year. It's typical of what in other organizations, but in the last quarter, we're already projecting, majority of the cities, there's not one, I think, that's absolved to this. It's already projecting loss of revenue and have already impacted, at least on the public sector, with regards to furloughing employees and things like that. And that's only expected to continue into the next 2 years for those that are doing 2-year budget cycles.
Yep, absolutely. It's a great point. At the local government level, you're feeling that same pressure that the state feels on its coffers as well. And yeah, once you start to see an economic downturn start to eat into the public sector, and you start seeing public sector furloughs, that's a very, very deep economic downturn. And one of the interesting things with programs like ours, like an MPA program, is that typically in times of economic downturns, we tend to see applications go up. And people start thinking about MPAs and start thinking about going back to graduate school. We haven't seen that over the past couple of months. Actually, we've seen applications start going down, which is, again, kind of counterintuitive to my 20 years of experience in MPA programs. And so I think even MPA programs are going to end up taking a hit in the next year or so. So there are already some red flags popping up at NASPA programs all over the country. And I think that's something we're going to have to address. But that's a great point. Yeah, local governments are feeling this direct strain as well. That when your coffers then contract, then you're going to have to cut costs where you can. If 85 to 90% of your budget is being consumed by personnel, well, where are you going to cut? You're going to cut personnel because that's the biggest part of your budget. That's a great point. Anyone else? Any observations or contributions?
Dr. Powell, I got one pertaining to the university. Even when I was at the university, I never understood the impaction with having a resource like Zoom be available for people to go online. And now with every university going online, it's I guess it's unique seeing the backpedaling of some saying, well, maybe this might be a better option. How does that not serve as a better option moving forward to kind of compensate for those losses? I know you have to get more staff and more resources, but I think moving forward, you've seen that option with Arizona State University online. I'm surprised why you don't see more of that.
Yeah, I agree. And, as somebody who is an early adopter of online education, I started teaching online courses when I was in Florida back in 2000. Now, admittedly, the online environment wasn't great in 2000. We were using WebCT as what we had used. So it wasn't terribly synchronous in terms of how we were doing it. But I've been doing it for a lot of years. And I know there is an institutional resistance at a lot of institutions to online education. And I think that's unfortunate. I've got some faculty members who I work with who are very much opposed to teaching online because that's not how they were taught. That's not how their program was delivered. And so they somehow see it to be somehow inferior when in reality, teaching an online class requires more of instructors, it requires more prep time, it requires more instructor effort. And my experience, and I've taught face-to-face as well as online, and I usually teach both each semester, is that the online experience, at least for me, usually has been a much richer experience than what I've actually experienced in the classroom face-to-face. So I think the answer is that, yes, online can provide those additional resources. I think it's a very effective method of communicating information. I think the problem is you have some institutional resistance from some faculty who have never taught online before. And so it is a staffing issue. And it's a matter of if you want to go online with all of your courses, you need to have faculty that either are trained in how to teach online or are willing to get trained in how to teach online. And sometimes, if you get, I'll just be very frank about it, sometimes you get a tenured professor who's been teaching for 30 years in the classroom and you ask them to then adopt online modality, they're going to laugh at you because they're not going to want to change the way in which they're teaching their classes. So I think it's staffing. I think that's one of the major impediments that we face in terms of migrating online. Now, the CSU has been one of the leaders nationally of migrating online. They have the entire CSU online system. A lot of our graduate programs are delivered online. So I think we've kind of been at the forefront of that. But again, you got to have the right people who are willing to teach those types of courses. I think that's the major impediment. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Good. Any other observations or? One of the interesting things to pick up on Curtis's point is what's the future of education going to look like? And not just at the higher education level, but also at the K through 12 level. I know I'm on a school board. I know in my district, we've been dealing with this issue of what do we do in the fall and how do we get kids back into the classroom? And the superintendent of my district is on the task force here in LA County to come up with a plan for reopening schools. And the problem is we're probably going to be able to reopen schools, K through 12 schools in the fall, but it's not going to be the way in which it used to be. I mean, you're not going to be able to have 30, 35 kids in one classroom. That's not going to happen. You're going to have 6 feet between kids. Kids probably aren't going to be able to eat lunch at school. So you're going to have to modify the way in which you deliver that education. So if you can't have 30 kids in a classroom at one given point in time, you're probably going to have to stagger the attendance of that class of 30. So maybe you'll have 15 coming in the morning and then 15 coming in the afternoon. Well, how do you then provide the same amount of education you used to provide in a school day in 3 to 4 hours in a classroom? Well, you're going to have to flip the classroom. You're going to have some of these online resources that you're providing to kids as well. And I think that's what you're going to see. I think you're going to see staggered schedules with kids not attending school 5 days a week, but doing some of their learning online and then attending school for a limited number of hours, maybe 2 or 3 days per week. It's going to be a different way in which we're educating kids. The problem with that, obviously, is that that's okay if you're dealing with 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, but how do you do that with a kindergartner or a first or a second grader? It becomes much more difficult to deliver that education online to a kindergartner or a first grader. And so I think the way in which districts roll this out will be dependent upon the district, the level of the district, and also the type of technology that they have available. So it'll be a completely different world come this fall in terms of how education is delivered, again, across all levels of education. So this is going to fundamentally change how we do what we do.
And to add on what you just stated right now, I mean, that even further impacts our workforce, because for those of us that are working parents that have children that are of that age, we have to go to work. And if you have a child that has to go to school in the afternoon as opposed to the morning, I mean, that just further kind of shifts. So it's something that we've been discussing in our organization, kind of what does that look like and how does that impact our employee workforce, and whether or not the option to continue teleworking is something that we consider as well, to allow that flexibility for that parent to be able to get their child to school while still providing the service that we need to provide.
Excellent point. Yeah, the schooling is obviously interwoven with work. And so you're right. I mean, the parents are going to have the ability to accommodate this type of new approach to education, so that local agencies are going to have to come up with different ways to make their employees able to be there for their kids. And so, yeah, can you extend the telecommuting? Is that something that's feasible to extend in your organization? And again, the answer is going to be it depends. Depends on the organization. It depends on the position of that person. For some folks, you know, they can telecommute relatively easily. Telecommuting is not an issue for me. I mean, I can telecommute because I teach most of my courses online. My faculty are now teaching online. I'm here on campus right now, but I'm here by myself. I'm the only person in the building. So the only people I see when I look out my window on campus are people who are out there walking their dogs, and that's it. But I can do that, but some other folks don't have that ability. So you're right, it's going to have major implications from an HR perspective for our local agencies as well. Absolutely. Again, a whole new world that we're going to see after this is, I hate to say after this is over, because we know it's going to be a gradual process. It's not going to just end one day. It's going to take months and months for us to gradually climb out of this. But I think when we are out of this, the way in which we do business, the way in which we educate our kids, the way in which we shop, the way in which we interact, I think it's going to be much different than what it was before. Good. Any other observations? Again, I don't want to depress you too much on a Friday. I'm sorry. The depressing source for you, but it is the reality. Hopefully some of these theories you do see in your organization. Again, the whole goal of this course is just not to inundate you with theory after theory. The goal of the course is to find some applicability. And so I hope at least some of the theories that you've seen in this class are things that you can apply in your organization, and hopefully apply to problems that you can identify and diagnose within your organization. There is no one best answer. We're always looking for the most appropriate answer for that given situation. You know me, and it all depends upon the context and the contingency that we are dealing with. Okay. Anything else? Any other observations for our check-in this morning, or if yeah.
Hi everyone. So in my discussion board, I forgot to mention that what I've noticed is in my department is that when it comes to quality management, there, like you mentioned, obstacles, there's the one where no one takes accountability. When there's an error and we are to go to meet with the error review panel to the ERP meeting, no one takes responsibility for that error. They go on to say, oh, it was the STAR 7 unit because they processed it, they touched the case. They were the last one to touch the case. Or it was customer service, it wasn't me. It was, well, even though that case belongs to me, I didn't do it. It was a duty worker. So when it comes to that, what MIE answers is like where we represent DPSS. So regardless, we're gonna get sanctioned, but then they see no purpose of, okay, why am I held responsible as an individual? If you're saying, oh, it's our error, like DPSS wise. So there's like I said, there's that obstacle where there's no accountability. And then I have a question, because in one of the MIE meetings, so when I was thinking about a living organism, I was thinking of DPSS. Well, it could never die. I was thinking that, but then I remembered when an MIE director said that after being sanctioned so much, after sanction, we could we could eventually have, like, state and federal could eventually have these benefits, these programs administered by private. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think, and you raised two important points there. We'll deal with the second one first. I think the answer is theoretically, yeah, it is possible. I mean, it's possible you can do contracting out, you can privatize, you can contract with a private firm to do similar types of functions than what the public organization is doing. So I think that is possible. Now, is it a credible threat? I think that's a different issue, because you'd have to look at, is there a corollary organization out there in the private sector that is capable of doing the same things as this public organization? And if there is a corollary organization out there that's capable of doing these types of things, the question would be, is it possible then to fashion a contract with that organization that would build in the same quality expectations and still have the same amount of oversight that we currently have over the quality of the services being provided? So I think, the one question is it possible? And then secondly, is it practical to contract out? So I would think probably it is possible. It's just a matter of, is it practical to be able to fashion a contract that would give you the oversight that you currently have with these functions being done by a public sector organization. It could just be used as a threat. That's quite a possibility, that they're just using it as a threat to try and enhance the performance of the organization, but it probably would be possible. Accountability, the first issue you bring up, is another important one. That's accountability. And we have a whole body of literature that looks at accountability in the public sector, asking the question, why is it so difficult to hold public sector officials accountable for their actions? And some of the authors like Mark Moore and Bennington and others will argue that there is a natural incentive for people to try and remain distant from these types of activities, because the more distant you can be from what an administrator is doing, the less culpable you are for any problems with their performance or any problems with their behavior. So there is a built-in incentive, not only for elected officials, but also for upper level managers, to kind of hold employees at an arm's length so that they can make the credible argument of, well, I didn't know what was going on, I wasn't involved in it, it's somebody else's fault. And it's difficult for us to build in this willingness on the part of our leaders of our organizations and our elected leaders to accept accountability for the actions of their subordinates. The old phrase, the Harry Truman, the buck stops here. With a lot of leaders, the buck doesn't stop there. It stops someplace else with somebody else. And so I think what you're doing is, when you're trying to build accountability into your organizations, you are sometimes working opposite of the rational self-interest of the leaders and upper level managers of that organization. So accountability is a very difficult thing to build into public organizations. But I hope that kind of answers both of the points that you brought up, but they're both very important points. Accountability is difficult to implement, and it is possible that we can privatize and contract out. It's just a matter of how practical it is, and if that threat is being used merely as an empty threat, or if that's something that they actually are considering doing. Because it is possible if there is that type of corollary organization in the private sector.
It did answer my question. Thank you so much. Yeah, and it did seem like a threat. It did seem like a threat at the time, but she did mention a state, and I was, for this purpose of last week's, actually for last week, for the purpose of last week's discussion, I tried researching which state she had mentioned. I think it was Texas, she said, that went private. So that's where I found credibility in what she said, but it did seem like a threat. Like, it's, like you said, it's possible, but I didn't know if it was actually possible and practical. Like, yeah. Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, and exactly. I would not be surprised if it was Texas, but was probably the state, because I think that there's been a lot of privatization in Texas, and there's a political culture in Texas that certainly does favor privatization. Now, here in California, I don't think you have the same type of culture that favors privatization as much as you would have in Texas, but I wouldn't be surprised if Texas was the state that she uses as an example. Good. Very good. Thank you, Brenda. Great points. Anybody else have any observations or anything at all they'd like to contribute?
Yes, doctor. Are you there?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, this is Eric Pineda. Right now, we're facing a couple of things at the airport. I've been there about close to 20 years, and I've experienced a couple of things that are going on now. Is where employees are being offered a separation incentive program where they're downsizing, or at least attempting to downsize a 10% of the workforce because they've identified that there's about 611 people who are close to retirement. So they're offering them an incentive program because of the economic downturn that the airport is facing. And another thing we're facing is that it's interesting because we're about to reintegrate the people that have been on COVID-19 leave, and there really isn't a process of how to reintegrate people yet. At least it hasn't been discussed. And I realize that as many things, sometimes with public as a public employee over the course of 20 years, that sometimes organizations are reactive and they basically sometimes wing it, or based on their own old practices, they just wing things and stuff. But I realize that it takes a unique person to at least get the ball rolling. And at least on my end, I've discussed with my peers that it's important to share with the people that are currently at the workplace, to let them know that it's important to reintegrate and accept all those people are coming back, and to understand that this was a pandemic, and that we weren't necessarily ready for all of these changes. But it's important, and it's important to understand, and I've tried to educate people little by little before we reintegrate people, that it's a matter of acceptance. It's a matter of understanding the situation that we're in here, and the least thing that we want to do is treat people differently because they were on some COVID-19 leave, whether that was for them or was a relative or anyone in their family. So I've taken it upon myself as a leader to let them know that, hey, these were our teammates, or these were our fellow officers before this happened. So it's important to accept them for whatever reason they were out on COVID-19, because I explained to them that everybody was out for different various reasons, whether it's the person themselves, or it's their members of the family, or anything else. So I've worked with that little by little and stuff. So my fellow peers are also working with that, and mentioning that, get constant information, constant education about the fact that the dire situation or the pandemic caused us to do different things and to manage things differently. So that's what I'm working with, those couple of things and stuff. About the internal process itself, we really haven't had any discussions about that, and it's probably only going to be through an email. It's probably going to be through a memo of some sort, and which is a little bit hard to deal with, because I prefer meetings in person. I think we're more effective as an organization when we have constant meetings in person. I find those more relatable. So, but that's just me. That's the things that I'm facing there at my department. So that's it for me.
Yeah, and the point on reintegration is a great one, because you're right. The pandemic is unprecedented, and so we don't really have anything to compare it to. But what the pandemic has done is it can serve as an interruption to our organization culture. And so in our culture, what we've done is we have established these norms and expectations of behavior, and these norms and expectations in terms of how we treat people, how we reward people, how we penalize certain types of behaviors. That a lot of those norms that we had established in our organization culture are then upset by the pandemic. So we had to make decisions, do things we otherwise would not necessarily do to get through the pandemic. So the question then becomes, as you reintegrate employees back into the organization, do some of those behaviors that were done during the pandemic, do those get integrated into a new organization culture? Or do we look at those behaviors as, well, it was a one-time type of thing? Those things had to be done during this crisis, but they're not necessarily endemic to the culture of the organization. And again, I think that's done on a case-by-case basis. So it's kind of, it's like what Robert Ben refers to as management by groping along. That's actually his theory, management by groping along, in that, we kind of find our way through a dark room the best that we can. And I think that's what we're all doing because of the crisis. I can give you a little bit of feedback, though, on an early retirement program. And some of my experience may apply in the airport situations, some of it may not. But in my school district last year, we initiated what we call the SERP, which is the Staff Early Retirement Program. And so we provided an incentive to employees who were within 5 years of retirement in order to induce them to retire. Because again, the idea is it's budget savings. And so if you have some of your teachers who have been there for 27, 28, 29 years, and you can provide them an incentive to go ahead and retire, then obviously they'll be replaced by a new teacher who will come in at a much lower level on the step and column salary structure. And so it saves the district a lot of money. Initially, it was envisioned as being only for teachers, because that's where the majority of savings would come from, were from teachers. But we have two different unions. We have a teachers union and we have a classified employee union. Well, it's very hard to offer this to teachers and not offer it to our classified employees. So we had to offer it to both in order so both unions felt that they were being valued and employees were being valued. We ended up saving a lot of money on the teacher early retirement program. We actually ended up losing money on the classified staff retirement program, because the disparities between the salaries of those classified staff who were retiring and those new classified staff we're bringing in to replace them, those disparities were much smaller than what we saw with teachers. The net was a net positive in that the district did save some money with both programs, because we had so much we were saving from the teachers, we could offset what we were losing with classified staff. But one of the lessons that we learned is that the board, the cabinet thought it was a wonderful idea. Initially, unions were on board with it. We had very strong interest in the early retirement program. But then we ended up getting some pushback from employees who were very close to qualifying but didn't quite qualify. So employees who were maybe 1 or 2 years away from meeting the eligibility requirement, they started saying, well, why can't I qualify? Can't you move the eligibility requirement down a little bit so you can get some of us? We actually had a bubble of teachers, a large number of teachers, who were at 1 or 2 years away from qualifying for early retirement. Obviously, you had to say no, because that ended up, if we would have said yes, there would have been a slippery slope, and then there's no stopping it. We'd end up losing money. But you will always have some of that pushback from people who just missed that cutoff date for early retirement. So those employees are now asking us, can we do this again in 2 years? Can we do this again in 3 years? And the answer is no, we really can't. This is kind of a one-time thing. And it's unfortunate some people missed it, but it's kind of the nature of early retirement programs. So the moral of the story is, even though you feel you're doing a really good thing, you're saving the district money, you're helping folks out who are ready to retire, you're always going to get some pushback from someplace. And there are always going to be some employees who aren't satisfied. I would say overall, our early retirement program was a success. It helped us save a good amount of money. Allowed those teachers who they were getting ready to retire, and so it just incentivized it for them, because they got then they're now over the next 5 years will be able to collect yearly amounts that will make up for their salary, and so they're going to benefit financially. The district benefits financially, and the early retirement program it worked out pretty well for both the district as well as employees. But you're always going to get some pushback from somebody on some issue with it, so it can be workable. So. That's my experience with our early retirement program. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but sometimes it's good to look at organizations who've gone through those programs before and kind of see what types of lessons they've learned and how effective those programs were for those organizations. Again, I think the net was a net positive for everybody from the early retirement program.
This is Teresa again. We did a similar program back during the Great Recession that happened back in 2007. And although, yes, it did generate a cost savings for our budget, we're still feeling the impact because some of those positions still have not been filled. And so we had work in some departments, we've had a work reduction of more than half of the workforce. And that's still being felt today. We haven't fully scaled back up to that same workforce. And now we can just assume with what's going on right now and hiring freezes that are being implemented that that won't happen in the very near future as well. So it does obviously generate a cost savings, but then it presents you a problem with your people skills and you being able to provide the same quality of service.
Absolutely, and it's a great point. And again, it's going to depend upon the organization. See, in my district, we were fortunate in that for our classified retirement program, we replaced a lot of those positions. In the teachers program, we didn't have to replace as many positions because through class size reduction, the class size reduction requirements had gone away. And so by coming to an agreement with the teachers union to increase class sizes by 2 students per class, it meant that a lot of those retired positions we didn't fill. And so we didn't have to worry about, well, we were bringing in younger teachers who didn't have the same experience. We didn't have to worry about that because we didn't really even have to fill those positions. But we ran into the same problem that you're talking about with our classified positions. And so we did have to fill positions we weren't planning on filling because we needed those people and we needed that skill set. Now, the problem, though, is we were filling those positions with classified employees who didn't have any experience in that position. So then you have ancillary costs in terms of training, professional development, and that's going to erode some of your financial benefit. But actually, I absolutely see what you mean, that you're going to have some of those positions that they remain unfilled that are necessary positions. That's going to have a detrimental impact on the quality of your services going forward in the future. Or if you are filling those positions with people who don't have the same experience, you're going to have to spend money on training and development in order to get them up to those performance levels that the former incumbents have. So I think those are great points. So yeah, it's not all rosy. It's not all a perfect situation, and there are costs and benefits associated with these types of early retirement programs. Excellent point. Anybody else? Any other observations or comments or anything at all? It's been a great discussion. I appreciate all of the contributions.
This is JJ, Professor. Eric, you kind of had my mind racing a little bit with some of your comments and the reintegration of the individuals who have possibly been exposed to COVID-19. The assumption is that maybe they were quarantined for whatever reason, and so they've been out of commission for quite some time and then reintegrated. So I'm reminded of a situation where at my particular district office, and so I'm kind of relating it to the field of theory and the tension that was kind of associated with this particular example. So one of my colleagues who happened to work on my same floor came to work and had been exposed to a family member. We learned that she had been exposed to a family member who had tested positive for COVID-19. And I started to think about the reactions of all the individuals on the floor. And so, that tension that was actually building up in terms of when it's saying push people in different directions as far as, field the theory, it was that direction of uncertainty, like, oh my gosh, we've been around this particular individual and we're learning hours later that she was actually exposed to someone who tested positive. And I'm just recalling the tension that was associated with that particular incident. And because there was that uncertainty of, should we all get tested now for COVID-19? Because now we've all been exposed. We're all on the same floor. We're all utilizing the same resources in terms of the laboratory, in terms of the break room, et cetera, et cetera. And the end result was that the individual elected to self-quarantine. So she did leave once she had discovered that everyone on the floor knew and everyone within the district actually knew. She elected, according to administration, to self-quarantine. But I do feel that maybe administration did ask her to kindly self-quarantine. It wasn't something that she elected to do on her own. So I am kind of associating it with, because if she had elected to do that on her own in the beginning, she wouldn't have been at work at the beginning. So that's kind of my mindset with that. But it was this uncertainty. And so the tension was only released or satisfied when we were relieved that she was gone, and that we had the option, you know, to test for the disease, of course. But I kind of was associating it with the filter theory, and I really wanted to add it to my paper, but I'm like, okay, maybe you don't want to add an example you've already discussed in, you know, the lecture or whatever. But I kind of associated it with that, and I'm not sure if that was applicable in this sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly can see that it could be applicable to field theory, and I can certainly see how there would be tension, you know, when people
Yeah.
figure out their own health. And so, yeah, I could absolutely see, you know, field theory fitting in there. And yeah, and that's a difficult situation. It's so tough because you understand the position of the employee, but you understand the position of that employee's colleagues as well. And there's so much that is still unknown about the specifics of the virus. You know, we're learning more every day, but there are still some questions out there in terms of transmission and, you know, who is most likely to transmit and at what point in time they're most likely to transmit. And so that's a very tough call. And so I'm glad it resolved the wing, which it did. You know, hopefully, you know, the employee at least had a say in terms of self-isolating. But I would have to agree with you. I think probably management was somewhat involved
Yes.
in that as well. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
your assumption is right in that regard. No, I like field theory there. Yeah, you know, it's one of my favorite theories. And yeah, I think it has some broad applicability, and that's probably a pretty good example. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. Very well done.
So like JJ mentioned, it's Brenda. This is Brenda. So someone, yeah, I can see it. The same tension that she mentions. Last week, we all received an email that someone tested positive for COVID-19 at my office, and there was so much tension. There was so many replies to that email that they demanded, they requested that we know who this person was. They didn't want to mention the name. They said due to confidentiality. But people wanted a name. People wanted administration to identify the person, because then they started with the questions: how do I know if I've been exposed? Should I get tested? I have someone vulnerable. We shouldn't. So there was, like she said, so many tension pulled in different directions. Only that in this case, I haven't seen any motivation that any satisfaction, or the way. Yeah, there hasn't. So we know that this person self-quarantined, but we don't know. There's still an uncertainty of, is anyone else exposed? And no one else was sent home. We're still going about you know, our job. So that tension is still there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. And I think, you know, one of the problems we have is that you want to release the tension, you want to alleviate the concerns, but you also have privacy rights of the individual that you have to contend with as well and be respectful for. And I think one of the ways in which this university has done it is that we've had a few employees and students who have tested positive. And so what the university has done is they've sent out emails to all students and employees, and they've said, so for instance, the kinesiology department, there was someone who a couple of weeks ago tested positive. University sent out an email to the entire school community saying, there's an individual, a faculty member in this department who has tested positive. The last time this person was on campus was this day. Located was in this building. They kind of gave a range of time within the past month of when the person was on campus, what building they were in, so that people can then kind of self-assess whether or not they were in proximity of that individual. And I think that allayed a lot of the concerns and released a lot of the attention that people thought, well, you know, I wasn't in that building or I wasn't in that vicinity, and so therefore I'm not at risk. I think that's something that the university did. I don't compliment the university a lot, Lord knows I don't compliment them hardly at all, but I do compliment them on that. Is I think that was a good way to release that tension and alleviate the concerns of other employees. But it's difficult. Yeah, people are very concerned about their own welfare, but you have to balance that then with the privacy rights of the other individual. All very good examples, all very difficult things and very difficult questions to deal with. And again, hopefully this is something that once we get past this, hopefully we won't have a pandemic like this again in our lifetimes. And so this is kind of a disruption now that we can hopefully learn from for the future. Any other comments or observations? It's been a really good session this morning. I appreciate it.
Professor, this is JJ one more time. I'm going back to the organizational analysis paper because now I have a question. Being that I know you mentioned that our discussion post really is like the crux of our papers, so 80% of our papers. Are you okay with the examples that thus far? I know you provided us with feedback and things of that nature, because it would appear a little bit redundant, or so we would add that, but we would expound upon it, is what your expectations are, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly it. So don't feel shy about taking your discussion board posts, modifying those, expanding upon those, and making that part of your paper. I absolutely expect that.
Okay.
The way in which I've designed the class, I design all my classes with that scaffolding type of approach. And so every discussion board post should hopefully help you build your organizational analysis paper. So yes, if you're doing it that way, you're doing it exactly the right way. So, yep. And I don't worry about the similarity. I anticipate there'll be a large amount of similarity between your organizational analysis paper and the discussion board post that you posted weekly. I assume that there's a lot of similarity and overlap. That's the way in which it's supposed to work. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so rest assured you're doing it exactly the right way. Good. Are there any other questions? Yeah, it's a great time to ask about the organizational analysis paper since we're about a week away, or we are a week away from the due date. So any other questions on the paper?
Yes, Doctor. Just one quick question. If anyone decides to present their make the presentation, in terms of the presentation, will you guide us on how to use how to present it in terms of your PowerPoint presentations? I've never done that before. It's actually my first time. And will everybody be able to see you, your face as you're presenting your slides on PowerPoint?
Yeah, good question. So if you decide that you are going to present live in our session next week, what you'll do is, you'll prepare your slides, the way in which you normally prepare a PowerPoint presentation. It can just be bullet points on the slides, a small number of slides. You probably won't take more than 4 or 5 slides. And then whenever it comes time for you to present, I will call on you. I will then allow you to be able to share your screen. So you can just click share screen, and then you can click on your PowerPoint slides that will pop up there. And then, yes, people will be able to see you. You'll have your camera on. They can see you while you're doing your presentation. And you can just use your arrow keys to go through your slides, do your presentation, and that's about it. If you would like, if you prefer, you can also send your slides to me if you would like. Then when it comes time for your presentation, I can go ahead and share them in our session. And then all you have to do is just talk, and I can cycle through the slides for you. So it's up to you whether or not you want to toggle your own slides, or if you want me to share them and toggle them for you. Whatever you're most comfortable with, either way is fine with me. But again, it's very informal, nothing to worry much about. You don't have to get dressed up or anything for it. I'm not grading on anything like that. So it's just a very, very informal, very quick. Here's my organizational analysis paper. Here are the classical theories. Here are the HR theories. Here are the systems theories. Here are the models of organizational effectiveness. Just a real quick presentation of what's in your organizational analysis paper. And again, you'll just do it just through hitting share screen. Click on your slides. They should pop up for everyone to see. So, and I can help you out with it too. So like I said, if you want to send the slides to me in advance, so I'll have them. in case something goes haywire, I can always put them up there for you and help you out with that. Okay. And again, it's completely up to you. If you want to, I think we have 1 or 2 people who will be presenting next week. I think everyone else has said they're going to just submit them. It's going to be the same credit either way. So you're not going to get a lower grade if you just submit them. It's both approaches are allowable, and so it's whatever you are most comfortable with. I just didn't want to require you to do it during the live session because, you know, the Zoom kind of got thrust upon you because of the pandemic, and you didn't sign up for Zoom. You signed up to be live and in person, and so I didn't want to, you know, again, force you to do it on Zoom when it wasn't an expectation when you signed up for the course or for the program. So just afford you maximum flexibility because I'm a really nice guy. Any other questions or anything else?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
wanted to see. Oh, go ahead, JJ.
No, Sandy, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
That's
I
fine.
just wanted to see if we could go ahead and touch upon the impact of organization on excellence. I don't know if it's common for all of us to have trouble finding that because at the end of the day, I feel like with public organizations, it is kind of hard to kind of see how do we know that we've achieved excellence if all we're basically doing is serving the public. And I don't know if counting like, okay, well, if we serve a large amount of people, like, does that really count as excellence? And to me, I didn't really see that.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, when you measure excellence, there are different ways of doing it, and different organizations will use different approaches. You know, one approach you could say, we serving more people than we served last year. Now, that's probably not a great approach to measuring excellence because quantity doesn't always equate with quality. But the question is, does your organization do any type of customer service satisfaction type of measures? You know, so do they ask the citizens who are making use of these programs how satisfied they are with the services that they are receiving? If you use anything like that, then the results from that survey, that could be a way in which you are measuring excellence. That's probably the most prominent way that a lot of organizations, especially social service organizations, measure excellence. Some organizations will measure excellence by recognitions. You know, are they receiving rewards? Are they receiving recognition from a state legislature or something like that? So they'll use those recognitions and those rewards as ways to measure excellence. I think probably the most prominent way is by actually asking consumers and citizens themselves through those types of satisfaction. I think that's the number one way in which we tend to measure excellence, especially an organization like a DPSS or some social service type of organization.
Thank you.
Sure. JJ, do you have a question?
I did, even though I emailed you this question, I guess I figured I would pose the question again so all of my classmates would actually hear and my peers would hear. The question was, do we include the questions or the prompts in our organizational analysis paper? So I'll let you respond to that. And additionally, for the PowerPoint, just to be clear, the due date is actually by May 15th, correct? And those were the questions that I posed. So,
yeah, good questions. Yes, for the organization analysis paper, feel free to use those as headings. And so, so for the section on classical theorists, you use that as a heading, and then talk about the classical theories in your organization. For neoclassical, use that as a heading, and then talk about neoclassical theories. Yes, I like to see you do that. I think it helps you organize the paper. It also helps me in reviewing the paper. So I strongly recommend doing that. In terms of PowerPoint and the due date for it, I think was the second question. Yes, May 15th is the final due date for your PowerPoint presentation. Obviously, if you're doing it next week in class, you're going to have it ready by the time of your presentation. So you can go ahead and turn it in next week. But if you're just submitting it through Canvas, then yes, by the 15th is your due date for those slides.
perfect. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Great questions. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, again, just to reiterate, please do send me an email if you haven't done so already. Let me know, are you presenting live in Zoom next week, or do you just want to submit them through Canvas? Let me know that so I can prepare them for next week, know how many people we have presenting. If you are going to present next week, if you want to send me your slides so I can have them as a backup, that would be great as well, so that I can share them for you in case the screen share doesn't work for you. I'll kind of be your backup. So I think that's probably a good plan to send them to me in advance. Okay, but certainly do email me and let me know what your plans are. If you have any other questions, questions emerge about the organizational analysis paper that's due next week or the final assessment that's due on the 15th, as always, feel free to send me an email. I will be doing my normal thing with your discussion board posts, and as soon as you have your responses to 2 classmates, I'll go ahead, grade that, provide you feedback. You know, to date, everyone's doing a great job on the discussion board posts. I haven't seen anything that worries me at all. I think you're doing a good job connecting material. I think probably those discussion board post grades are going to inflate things a little bit, but I'm not going to lose any sleep at all over that. I think it's more what you get out of the course rather than the actual grade that you earn in the course, at least for me, is what's important. So I've been very happy with your discussion board posts, and just keep it up. And 2 weeks we'll be done and you'll be moving upward and onward in the program. Okay. Email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for a very good session this morning. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk again next Friday at 10:30. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good day, everyone.